the day 77 men stood against 4,000. October 3rd, 1993. The sun was burning over Mogadishu, Somalia, a city already torn apart by war, famine, and chaos. What was supposed to be a quick 30-minute operation would soon turn into one of the most intense urban battles American soldiers had faced since Vietnam. 77 U.S. Rangers and Delta Force operators found themselves trapped deep inside hostile territory, surrounded, outnumbered, cut off, and what happened next would test the very meaning of brotherhood, courage, and sacrifice. They had been told it would be simple. A fast, in-and-out mission, capture to lieutenants of a powerful warlord. Secure them, extract, back to base before nightfall. But war has a way of rewriting plans. Somalia, in 1993, was not just unstable, it was collapsing. After years of civil war, rival militias ruled the streets of Mogadishu. The United States had entered the country initially on a humanitarian mission to ensure food reached starving civilians. But as violence escalated, American forces were tasked with targeting the militia leader responsible for attacks on UN peacekeepers Mohammed Faraidid. Elite units were deployed, Army Rangers, Delta Force operators, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were men trained for the hardest missions on Earth. That afternoon, helicopters sliced through the sky above the city. Black Hawks and Little Birds moved into position. Rangers fast-roped down from hovering aircraft into the streets below. Delta operators moved swiftly toward the target building. Everything was unfolding according to plan. Then the first crack of rocket fire shattered the air. An RPG streaked upward and slammed into a Black Hawk helicopter. Super 61 went down. The explosion echoed through the city. Smoke spiraled into the sky. What had been a controlled operation instantly turned into a rescue mission. On Shughart, Somali militia fighters began pouring into the streets. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. Armed civilians joined them. Gunfire erupted from windows, alleyways, rooftops. The Rangers were no longer hunters. They were surrounded. Within minutes, a second Black Hawk, Super 64, was hit and crashed miles away from the first site. Now there were 2 downed helicopters, 2 isolated crash sites, and dozens of Americans trapped in hostile territory with enemy fighters closing in from every direction. The plan had collapsed. The Rangers formed defensive perimeters in the streets, using Humvees, debris, and whatever cover they could find. Bullets tore through walls. RPGs slammed into vehicles. Dust and smoke filled the air. Communication was chaotic. Convoys attempting to reach the crash sites became lost in the maze of Mogadishu's narrow streets, blocked by burning tires and barricades. For the 77 men closest to the first crash site, there was no escape. They dug in. Every alley became a potential ambush, every rooftop a sniper's nest. The sound of gunfire was constant, deafening, relentless. Ammunition began to run low. Water ran out. The African heat was suffocating. And yet they held. Across the city, at the second crash site, a small group of Delta operators volunteered for something extraordinary. To men in particular, Gary Gordon and Randy Shughart repeatedly requested permission to be inserted onto the ground to protect the wounded pilot of Super 64. Command hesitated. The area was swarming with militia fighters. They asked again and again. Finally, permission was granted. They were dropped into what many would later call certain death. With only sniper rifles and limited ammunition, Gordon and Shughart fought back wave after wave of attackers, protecting Chief Warrant Officer Michael Durant from being overrun. They knew the odds. They understood the situation. They stayed anyway. They fought until they ran out of ammunition, Both men were killed in action. Their stand would later earn them the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. Back at the first crash site, Rangers were still fighting as darkness began to fall. Night in Mogadishu brought a new danger. Visibility dropped. Militia fighters used the cover of darkness to close in. The Americans, wounded and exhausted, continued to hold their perimeter. Convoys attempting rescue were repeatedly forced back by heavy resistance. Vehicles were destroyed. Soldiers were hit. The streets had become a battlefield of chaos and fire. Hour after hour, the Rangers refused to break. They carried wounded comrades through gunfire. They returned fire with precision. They held corners, rooftops, alleyways, determined that no man would be left behind. Finally, as midnight approached, a relief column of UN tanks and armored vehicles fought its way into the city. Pakistani and Malaysian forces supported the extraction. It was not clean. It was not easy. But it was a breakthrough. The trapped soldiers began moving out on foot and inside armored vehicles in what would later called the Mogadishu melee, running through hostile streets far to reach. By the time the battle ended, 18 American soldiers were dead. Dozens more were wounded. Hundreds of Somali fighters had been killed. The images of that day shocked the world. But beyond the headlines, beyond the politics, beyond the controversy, something else remained. The story of men who did not abandon each other. Men who fought not for glory, not for recognition, but for the brothers standing beside them. The Battle of Mogadishu became a defining moment in modern American military history. It exposed the brutal reality of urban warfare. It demonstrated how quickly peacekeeping can turn into survival. And it revealed something deeper, the unbreakable bond forged between soldiers under fire. Courage is not loud. It is not always triumphant. Sometimes, courage is holding a street corner when you know reinforcements are hours away. Sometimes, it is volunteering to protect a wounded pilot when the odds say you will not return. Sometimes, it is staying when leaving would be easier. On October 3rd, 1993, 7-7 Americans stood against thousands. They were surrounded. They were outnumbered. But they did not surrender. And in the heart of Mogadishu, under a foreign sky, they proved that brotherhood can be stronger than fear, and that even when history is complicated, sacrifice is undeniable. This was not just a battle. It was a test of resolve. And those who survived carried its weight for the rest of their lives.